Thank you, everyone, for being here, welcoming me in Poland. If we'd like to talk about pierogies and you have good suggestions, I would like to know them. All the restaurants. I'm very, very interested in dumplings. So, anyways, why is Patricia Kong talking about ethics? It's not something that is usually associated with me, which I know it sounds a little bit awkward, but I do think about leadership a lot, and especially in our space when we want to be agile. So ethics, ethical leadership, but ethics is a super broad topic. And a lot of people could say, hey, it's subjective or it's objective. But I'm not sure because I'm not a philosopher. But I have a story that kind of broke this down for me and let me understand why everything is not black and white. And my understanding is that people in Poland, you live in the gray. So that's good. So on this map, what you see is Indonesia. You see Bali. And over here is an island called Lombok. And in the middle, I don't think there's a flasher here, but in the middle is called the Lombok Strait. Now, this is a really, really dangerous body of water. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because 12 years ago, I think, or maybe 14, I don't know, a long time ago, my husband and I crossed this strait in a small boat. And he only told me recently, I think maybe a few months ago, that it is actually one of the most dangerous bodies of water to cross. It's very deep, it's very rocky. I think last month, 36 people died. In 2011, I think a boat with 200 people died. But I said, oh, what the heck? That's really unethical. You didn't tell me, you didn't give me the decision. As a matter of fact, all he gave me was motion sickness pills, and I just kind of slept the whole time. And my head did this. Here's another thing. I don't know how to swim. And I don't think they gave me a life jacket. But his point was, wait a second, we got there, we had a good time, and we did it in less than 2 hours. We didn't take this big ferry, and we didn't take this plane that's been blacklisted. So I don't think it's unethical, right? So I would love to know from you, just so I can tell him, how many of you think that it was unethical? Okay, the rest of you, we're going to have to talk later. But, so that's what I mean when I say ethics is really broad. It's kind of a big topic, and it's in the gray, which is what we deal with, right, in complex situations. But that's not even what really got me thinking about ethical leadership. Is it about what's going on in the world today? Probably. Is it about what's happening in the United States, where I'm from? Probably. Is it because something like ethics, ethical leadership, I think would help us better as professionals? Definitely. But to be honest, I'm much more simple than that. So I'm sitting on my phone, and I was scanning, what's going on, some fun things, distracting myself. And I saw this video, and this video is really what triggered me to want to think about what drives us to make the decisions that we do. Hopefully this works for you. Also, I'm not sure I should be playing this. If you don't like swearing, wear earmuffs. In America, okay? So let's see if this works. So what he says is he couldn't imagine that a child wakes up in the morning and says, I would like to be a senior product manager. They wake up and they think, how can I save the world? How can I go on an adventure? What can I do to improve? They don't think about, how can I make the most money, right? Not at first. And so they go into life with this kind of curiosity and this intention. And why I found that ironic was because, well, we're all basically creating products, and there's a lot of crappy things that have been created, but I don't think any of us had bad intentions when we were, working on those things. We had the excitement. And so that really triggered me to think about why do things happen and how does it evolve? And a big thing here, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with, it's called future thinking. That's from design thinking. And it's about how when we start to create things, how do we think about the future scenarios? What foresight do we use to think about how this might affect populations in the future? And how would that drive the different decisions that we make? So something you can explore definitely with your team's future thinking. The thing that makes this really important is that when we neglect to think about what's going to happen in the future scenarios, we have different consequences. And we see that. So hairspray, right? Something like the hairspray. Most of you have used it. You look very put together. You can think about what that's doing to, I think, health, basically. And they also talk about climate. We have single-use plastic. That's something that was created out of convenience. I'm wearing Invisalign, love plastic. But also that's hurting the planet, right? You have diesel. It allows people to get from point A to point B. And that's also something that's affecting, let's say, the planet. Move into the digital age. We have mobile phones, which are supposed to make people more connected, have access at any time. That's creating a little bit of, dare I say, kind of addiction. And social media in the digital age is something that was really, really, really supposed to connect us and allow us to be in all places at once. So if you thought last year's keynote had a lot of data, wait till you see mine. Because I have the data. Because I think it's a little bit alarming. So this data is from the United States, and it's a pretty concerning trend among younger people. There's something that we see also in global situations. But there's, over the past, I think, this is a pretty big study. But there's 4 things that they're noting here. And what's most important to look at when you look at these data trends, at least for me, is about the younger people who are about 16 to 39 years old and what's happening to their personalities. So you can see conscientiousness is how aware are they? What are they doing? How much effort do they give? That's declining. And it's declining on all trends, but that's really declining. Neuroticism, that's something about, anxiety. That's really going up. And we're seeing these in mental health trends, at least in the United States. Agreeableness. How are we able to connect and have different discussions and talk to each other and see different points of views? That's going down. And extroversion. We know here introversion, extroversion, blah, 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 but extroversion here, the way that they look at it is actually there's some factors that affect mental health and how you can contribute to society. All these kind of things together, there's a big study has been put together to look at people, how long they're married, different factors like that. And I'm not usually a person who's very alarmed, but this data says something. We understood that social media was supposed to connect us and supposed to make things so great. But what we've created with the internet is actually kind of corroding the young people's lifestyles. And so you can see this is also affecting them and what's going to happen when they come into the workplace. Maybe you have children that are around this age. Again, you can see the general trends here, but you can really see 16 to 39 what's happening. And I think this data, I want to say this, it kind of goes back 2 decades, but I've lost that little point in here. But it's a wide set of data. And so you can see in that first chart, are they making plans and following through? Well, we can blame that on the teenage years, but look at how that's trending down. I probably allowed some of your children to say, wait, there's the data. This is why I act that way. I don't finish things. Persevere until finish. You can see that that's going down, is easily distracted. That's going up. No surprise there. And can be careless. Look at that, right? So this thing that we created, the internet, is really affecting how our young people are operating. And again, I will say this is an American study, but we fundamentally misunderstood the impact, or we didn't think about fundamentally how this would affect the future. And it's been quite a short span, right, the internet that we've had. not to keep on putting driving the point, but I couldn't help it because it says the death of partying. I'm always wondering, why aren't young people going out? Why aren't they talking? We created dating apps. We created all these things. And in fact, what they saw was that young people, not even just young people, but people are going on their dating apps, and where they might talk to people, they have very short-term connections. And maybe that's what they want. Maybe that's a different thing. But with the goal and the promise of saying we're going to make long-term partnerships, and of course, extending that reach, it's a little bit different. So here again, you see 15 to 24-year-olds. What this means is that they're not going out and they're not having gatherings. The thing that I actually notice that is pretty big is the 65-year-olds and up. That's really crazy. And so the 15 to 25, that number says 69%. It means 69% of 15 to 24-year-olds are going out less and gathering less than they were 2 decades ago. And what we see, and this is a global thing, is that it's causing this this pandemic of loneliness. So there's different studies on that, but I'm not going to show that. But it is causing loneliness, and we know that loneliness causes a lot of different mental health issues. So we know all this. We understand that. We have this data. And now what's happening is we're moving closer and able to move faster with powerful tools like AI. We have tons of data that we can make it say almost whatever we want it to say. But how do we think about what's right and what's wrong? Is it important? How do we drive these conversations? So if we're talking about this, that is what led me to think about ethical leadership. So what is ethical leadership? There's a lot of things out there that you can research. You can find different definitions of it. There's 6 factors that I liked that's described from the ESAD Business School in Spain. And it has respect, honesty, responsibility, fairness, trust, and equality. When I see those things, they speak to me because it makes me think about the Scrum values. But let me just describe a little bit how they're explained from this business school. So respect is really about having a deep connection, an empathy for others, and recognizing the worthiness of someone. So it's not just, oh, I respect you. It's really seeing a person and wanting to see a person and what their worth is. Honesty. We are Agilists. Honesty and trust is how you build transparency in relationships, use transparency to build relationships with others, right? But honesty is really saying, I'm going to give you the feedback that you need. The next one is responsibility. In America, we talk about accountability in the English language with the Scrum Guide, and this is about the accountability that you have to yourselves. This is about the accountability that you're going to help your teams have with what they're doing. And so it's really about owning the decisions and owning the behaviors. So I think that's important. Fairness means that, this is hard, but it means I don't prefer one person over another. Fairness is I'm going to be fair. That's fine. Now, trust, where we connect it with honesty, trust here, the way that we think about this is I'm going to walk the talk, I'm going to walk the walk. Trust here also is a little bit different because it means I recognize that trust is earned. You trust me, but I also have to trust you. So you can see how these go together. And the last one is equality, which is a little bit different from what we have in the Scrum values, where it says we should have opportunity that is correct for all. And so this, for me especially, is important because it recognizes that some people come from different experiences, some people have different privileges, but when we're operating in this way and we're thinking about ethical leadership, we're gonna have the same standards. So that's nice. There's these 6 ways to describe ethical leadership, but if you're someone like me, I like to break rules. So I'm going to walk right up to the line and dance on it. So this wasn't enough for me to understand what is ethical leadership. So the best way for me to think about it is, what is unethical leadership? So that means that we're going to ask a lot of questions. And this is something that I think we can use in our everyday lives, is when we start to think about unethical leadership, is start to think about who does it benefit? And the way that I think about unethical leadership, it might be, am I doing something that is just for my personal gain? It's just about me. When we're trying to make a decision, whose expense is it going to cost? And who is it going to benefit? So I have these 4 circles here. And so there's 4 bodies. There might be more. Maybe I'm missing one. Maybe you have some suggestions about who could be added. But there's customers. Let's just say the board, leadership. There's executives and employees. And so it's interesting to think about who benefits from a decision, especially when you're thinking about things like maybe benefits, bonuses, HR. When we talk about data, the metrics that you're using, who is going to benefit from those things? And for me, some of the gray behavior lives in when it benefits multiple groups. So let's say we have management in our company, and they are bonused on, let's say, revenue, right? It's a pretty common thing. If you get a cut. So who does that benefit? Well, it benefits the executive. It doesn't benefit the employees, but it may benefit the board. And I'm talking about executives, meaning management, and that's who it benefits. So you can think about what kind of motivations they might have, right? And if that's ethical or unethical. There's another thing to think about is, what kind of decisions would we make that might benefit executives, the board, and employees, the company, but they're not going to benefit customers. Maybe we saw some of that during the pandemic. It's understandable. It's going through this kind of mental exercise to understand, do I agree with that? Is that unethical or ethical? The other thing that I would add here that's important to think about, besides, actually, I should note, how often do we actually make a choice that's just to benefit customers? That might exist, very interesting. But the other thing to add here is there a short-term versus long-term benefit? So I was talking about future thinking, but an interesting thing is there a decision that we might make in our business or in our team that might benefit, let's say, all 4 of those parties, but it's short-term? So an easy one to say is, hey, something like Shell or BP or something like petroleum companies, they're going to do things, but without that foresight, it benefits these 4 groups. But for how long? We don't know. So I think this is a good mental exercise that I enjoyed considering when I'm thinking about ethical and unethical leadership. So next I'm going to share with you something that's based off of something real, a real example, a real story. And it's going to walk through these things to show that how we, we're starting a really broad topic, but how we probably deal with these same situations. This kind of customer did, and what does it look like? So let me introduce you to Juliana Silva. That's not her real name, and it's not me. So Julia works at a startup building data apps. This could be, in your situation, maybe not a startup, but she's building data apps. And the company's goal is to help people form meaningful connections in a digital world that often feels transactional. This company believes that love, companionship, and belonging can be fostered thoughtfully through technology. Juliana interprets thoughtfully as not swiping like other apps. Because Juliana is very into dating apps. She's been using it. She's seen other people successfully get married. She's looking for a relationship. She has an attachment to this company. But increasingly, she's really thinking about how she can thoughtfully build this business And of course, like in all startups or even general businesses, we're looking for the money. We want to move quickly and we want to grow. Why? Because they're working in a subscription-based business, which is forecasted to be, I think it's like $700 billion now, dollars. It's supposed to be 1.2 trillion by 2030. So they said, hey, we need to move. We want a piece of this pie. We need to move quicker. We're going to take out these other companies. We really have meaning. Do that, but we want you to show us, because we don't understand any other way, the evidence that people are engaging with the app and that the team is committed to their work so we can get more investment. She's like, okay, right? That makes sense. We're running a business. So she tries. And this is just a sample. And they collect different data, but she's trying to prove the engagement and the commitment. So she decides on some information that's easy to track and understand, right? Keeping the principles of, let's keep this simple. You know, these executives, they're very busy. They're asking me for these 2 metrics. I can provide that. So these metrics, she highlights, are trending positive. And we can see at the bottom, she's really looking at time spent in app, because that's just going to show, you know, good numbers for their investors. And she looks at task carryover, right? So what she's trying to prove is that the team is being very effective. They're working. Their velocity is increasing. You know, it's nothing, not a hit on velocity. They use that. She doesn't even care to point that out to them. What she does show is, hey, we're moving faster, and our overtime rates in the team, they're okay, but they're really not carrying over work, so isn't that great? And the team feels happy. On this side, for the business side, she's really looking at that engagement, right? So they're in the app, we're keeping them in there, they're not moving around, we don't want them to exit. That's interesting. So we're looking at also monthly users, their swipes, and you know, how are they doing on matches? But she wants to give them this information, and I think that's a fair first start. But of course, we kind of saw what could happen from that, right? Because we have a little bit of foresight and experience, so the things start to crack. So about 3 months later, yes, there is more time that customers are spending in the app. But now Juliana is knowing, because she's tracking generally the data, is that there's customer churn. What that means is that the customers are starting to uninstall the app. They are starting to say it feels addictive. Now, what the team did was that they started to build more little things that would just keep them in there, right? Keep them in the app, make it a little bit fun. It's a little bit buggy, but you know, it's interesting, and the people ultimately aren't finding good relationships. The other thing that she notices when she looks at the operational metrics is that support tickets are up. And that's because we said, you know, it's a little bit buggy. But the mood of the team, because it's always pointing at these types of metrics, they're getting frustrated. And they want to work on fun things, but it's very hard to innovate, and sometimes they have to balance. Are we trying to create new things to keep people in the app, or you know, should we be fixing those things? And clearly they're trying to balance it, and it's very hard. So when you think about what we shared from the let's say the first dashboard, is think about who is benefiting. When they ask for those different metrics, it's not wrong to ask for that data, but what's happening from the behavior? What is ethical or unethical? I'm not sure myself. It depends. As a matter of fact, somebody was saying, Patricia, can you show us what's unethical, what's an unethical metric and what's an ethical metric? And I said, I don't think that there's any metric that's ethical or unethical. It's what you do with it. Anyways, so Juliana, she's smart. So the quarterly meeting's coming. She knows that she has to get some more information back to her management. But the team has seen what's going on. They understand that. And they know that the average customer time in the app is high, which they're happy to show. But they know that the churn is increasing steadily, right? And so they kind of say, hey, Juliana, like, we've been working really hard on this. I think we can make some changes. We can get rid of those bugs. Do you think that you can change the data a little bit, skew the data, so that it doesn't look as alarming. We like our jobs. We need our jobs. So this might sound really like, whoa, they're I know people who skew the data a little bit. We try to make that line look a little flatter, So let's be honest with ourselves. That kind of stuff happens. And Juliana thought she was doing, what management wanted, which is why she made those decisions. But it's starting to occur to her. So what happens now? Now she's faced with this interesting dilemma. Should I have a difficult conversation, bruise my ego, look like I'm not protecting the team, but be very transparent about where we are so that we can make a next step? Or should I think about persuading the company that we're moving in the right direction, give us a little bit more time? Right? This is very simple when you think about it from Juliana's perspective, but if we went back, and this was not the team asking Juliana to skew the data, and it was her management skewing the data, that would be maybe even a different pressure, right? But let's move back. Okay, so Juliana, she's getting some coaching from the people in Poland, and she understands she made some bad decisions. Okay, so she's able to accept that, and she even knows that what she did, she's reflecting, she's like, I can see how that drove some undesirable behavior. And the way that she thinks about approaching this is, how can I change the way that we think about how we're going to move forward, right? So she wants to create some alignment. So she understands that the time and app and the team commitment made the team lose sight of the goals. They really honed in on that. They were really, really focused. And she even kind of, she knows that maybe the commitment thing, they cause people to inflate their story points. Maybe they stretch their hours. Some things happen. So she knows about that, and she's having a reflection about it. Well, what should she do now? It's not just going to be a kumbaya, right? So let's think about this in different ways. Some of you might be familiar with the 3 V's of product ownership: vision, value, validation. Can you raise your hand if you're familiar with that? Okay. So those are 3 V's. When we talk about product ownership in Scrum, we talk about how we can use that to anchor ourselves as effective product owners. So we think about vision, where are we going? We think about the value that we're trying to get from what we deliver to the customer. And we want to do that through transparency. We're continuously validating to improve. Very simple way. So when I was thinking about ethical leadership, I said, let's add 2 more. So I created the 5 V's. The 5 V's of ethical leadership is here. And it'll be interesting if you agree, if you think there's more or less, but there's only so many V words. But I think there's 2 that are important to add, which is about virtue, your integrity, and your voice, how you communicate, how you negotiate, how you can present that and create alignment with others. So let me quickly go through each one and see if they make sense. So when you're thinking about value, let's determine if the outcome, if what you're trying to do, if what you're trying to deliver to your customer is worth it, right? Just because a customer wants something doesn't mean they get it. We have to decide, is this something really worth it? So where we can start is you think about, what does the customer want? What do they need? And if it's worth closing that gap. That's what we call the satisfaction gap in evidence-based management. So it's, what do they want? Where are they now? What's that gap? And it's really funny because sometimes when I explain satisfaction gap to some people, they innately think of their gap as a manager, or their gap of what I want the customer to do. This is about the customer's gap and if that's worth closing. So that's how I think about value. Validation, right? So this is where we talk about measuring for insight versus control. What we saw with Juliana is that there was a lot of measurement for control. There's some things, but the fact that they made it targets, the fact that they're so focused on it, that becomes a control thing. And we have to understand in general, yes, data is not neutral, but how you use it can become very important in terms of, is it biased, is it not, how are we collecting it, analyzing, all that stuff. But when you start to skew it, that's where your integrity comes into play. So when we look at different data and different metrics, for me, I always talk about measures because it's really about, are we going here? Is this to the right direction? That's why I call it a measurement. And so does the information allow us to inspect and adapt? Does it allow us to have a conversation, to communicate? Or is it really just showing us where we are in terms of a plan? So is it used to compare the behavior, the things that we've done, with what we said we would do? And that's a thing to think about in terms of validation. Vision is, as an ethical leader, right, and for product ownership, we say, set that North Star. So vision is trying to have the audacity to say, I can see something and I want you to come with me. And so this notion of leadership is that people will follow you because they believe in the vision. So you're inspiring them and moving that toward that direction. What's important is to not get completely stuck and inflexible about it. To know that we're going to look at some ways to validate if we're actually moving in the right direction towards that vision. So beware of a singular obsession. That's where it kills the opportunity. When you get so blinded, you miss the things on the side. Virtue. So these are the two that I added. Virtue is thinking about your character over consequence. It's about integrity. And this is sounding, that made me think of Buddhism, but it's really, instead of like, is this the right thing to do? It says, who am I and how should I be in this situation? I work for Scrum.org for 13 years because we're a mission-based company. So every day when I think of my decisions, it's, is this helping the mission? Who am I in this moment? So I can always kind of fall back on that. That's really tied in with knowing your position and what your boundaries are, which leads us to voice. So Magda, one of the Magdas, the dark-haired Magda, and I worked on a paper about, or some research around negotiation. And one of the things about negotiation, especially in this instance that we're looking at, is kind of knowing where your boundary is, your line, right? So like I said, I go up to the line and I dance on it. Some people will say, okay, but I want more. You're going to say, hey, I stop here. So voice is using your voice to say no. It's using your voice to say yes. It's using your voice to communicate. Because we can have the ways that we believe things should happen, but if we don't communicate them, then how are people to know, right? So I was talking to a team leader and she was saying, hey, I've been trying to do all these great things. I'm helping train up other people and we're doing all these things. I'm really trying to be a great leader. And when the company asks me to do things, I say yes. But then what happens is that her company is so big that when she was doing things to help, they weren't really keeping that information global. So in fact, what it looked like was she wasn't doing the stuff when in fact it just wasn't communicated. So voice is not just about our voice, but we want to make sure other people are also championing us too. Is that a broken image for you? Okay, I apologize. So let's pretend that we understand from all the things that we learned our ethical position, where we stand. So now in Juliana's case, she's thought about these things. She's thought about the 5 V's, and she understands this is where I stand with what I'm comfortable with where I want to be as a person and as a professional. When you are being asked to make these decisions in your organization, there's some other dimensions. The image was very ugly. I drew it. So there's other dimensions that you might compare this to. What is legal? All right? Generally, we don't want to break all the laws. So what is legal? What does the company want? What is the company's desire? And what is actually possible for us to do technically? So if you can imagine how these 4, I don't remember how many he said, how many of these circles, how they interoperate, the thing that stands always in the middle is your ethical position. So what's legal could be very, very big. What the organization wants might, be a little bit side to what you're comfortable with. The tech team can do everything, they say, It's really interesting to think about that and to think about how long. So that's really that thing, and I'll try to fix that before it goes out. So when we start to realign these conversations and we start to think about, okay, I understand all these things about how I should be, my mindset that I should be thinking about as a leader, what's a way to frame them? Some of you may know what evidence-based management is. If you don't, there's a guide. I also wrote a book with a few other people. And it's really exactly what we're thinking is about how do we use evidence to manage with empiricism, right? And so it starts with this notion of we need to create alignment and understand that we're talking the same language. How do we do that? We do that with goals. There's 3 levels of goals. Strategic, something that's very far away. Intermediate, something that's a little bit closer, maybe a product goal, if you're thinking about Scrum, and the immediate tactical goal. So what's right in front of us that we know that we can try to pursue. And that might be a sprint goal if you're using Scrum. And then we look at ways to measure it. So there's key value areas. You can read about those things more, but that's around unrealized value, which is what's potential, current value, where are we now? And then we look at our ability to innovate. Can we do that? And our time to market. So it's a way to kind of categorize the different potential that we have around our goals. And then, obviously, empiricism. So Juliana thinks about these things. Obviously, we love a framework. She uses this as her language to talk. So she refocuses. So she is really focused on the notion that love, companionship, and belonging can be fostered through technology if done thoughtfully, right? Remember, that wasn't about swiping. So she speaks to leadership. She said, guys, remember this goal. I really want us to focus on a company. This is what makes us different. So she refocuses that. And then she said, okay, if our long-term objective is to help customers have a meaningful connection through their app, let's put 25% on that. And if we've achieved that, then we'll know that we're moving in the right direction. And what she wants to see is that people have been pausing their accounts because they found some sort of love interest that they're willing to pursue in their way. Okay, so she talks to management about that. And now she's refocusing and she's talking to the team. All right, so they do their reflection and she said, we need a direction that we can move in together for this app. What have we been doing? The team thinks about what they've been doing. They're really excited that they can have this time because they are also in it for the company goal. They want to reconnect with customers. And the one thing that's important is that they're thinking about their customers as actually people and not as just numbers on a platform or subscription. That's another thing that's been happening in our industry, and they are really excited to get back out there and talk to people. So they think a good start is to increase their customer confidence. So they have a score. So we know we've achieved this goal when the customer confidence score increases from 2.2 to 3.2, and we see the swipe to match ratio increase by 8%. So they're putting information on this, not as like a target per se, but we're moving in the direction if we can fit this. And again, this is maybe like 3 months based off of what they're doing, or a little bit closer. It depends if they're working on other things, because they were. So they were so bent on having customers stay in the app. They were trying to build little games. They were doing all these different things. And what had happened is that they weren't actually focused on the actual platform. So you see that they have a high production bug count, and they have some technical debt to deal with. And so a goal they set for themselves that's related to the intermediate goal is to work on this. They want to increase the quality of the customer experience, and they know they'll see this when they see a 20% reduction in production incidents. Goals are hard, but you can see how this makes sense when you start from something that is like a vision. Okay. So her dashboard looks different now. And this is not a perfect dashboard, but this is how, when I was talking about the key value areas, we can categorize things. So this is different than saying, I have a number, let's hit that number. There's a lot of different things. Juliana uses the EBM goals. She has them here. She can talk to them, to her management about this. She makes it transparent for everybody to see. And what she's trying to show is their progression toward these different types of goals. And these help her and her management keep a holistic view. Isn't that great? What a fun story, right? So it shows you how we can go through these things and focus and realign. this would be based off of evidence-based management. But let's think about this. Let's think about, wow, Juliana, we were really thinking about these goals, and we're talking about thoughtful and meaningful connections. So what we've decided and what we've thought about is how we could use AI to make this even better. People, they aren't really, does it really matter if it's a human that they're connected with? What if we could get all these numbers up and do something really riveting like add AI avatars, and we can have these chatbots that people can start dating, and let's mine the conversations and see what people really like. And it's okay, you know, in Japan they're falling in love with robots. Maybe we can do that too, so people are less lonely. It doesn't really go against any of these goals, right? Those were there, meaningful connection, that's a little subjective. But that's where I bring you back to this. Who benefits from that sort of decision? And how long will that decision last? So we started this off by talking about future thinking and all the things that are possible which could be exciting. That AI avatar example, I just thought that up, right? I'm a little bit nutty. But it is really possible. If people are looking for a connection, they're lonely, does it really matter if they're just talking to a screen and the other person on the screen is some image of what they think is ideal? And so that, again, is where ethical behavior and ethical leadership comes in. I don't know what Juliana does in this situation, but it's interesting to think about that. And so when you're making decisions for yourself or within your team, this is kind of like stakeholder mapping. Take a look at the people that you think it affects. Take a look at what you think would happen and think of the scenario. You can't predict it. And see if that can guide your behavior a little bit. So I think, let's see if this breaks. There are some resources that you can use. I didn't go very deeply into everything. Some of you may have been at the workshop that Dark Hair Magda had yesterday about product negotiation or ethics. Ethics. And that's about the ethics that you're putting into your products, right? So that's really about how do we use data? Are we being corrupt? What do we think about security? We did some stuff on negotiation. There's the evidence-based management guide. These lists lead you to different places. Two things that I put here that may be a little bit different than what you would expect is facilitation. Remember, one of the 5 V's is about voice. So it's about how do we have that conversation? How do we create a safe space that we can confidently do so and learn from? The other one that I just participated in a podcast is by the author, Elaine Lim, and she wrote the book Unlearning Silence. So creating space for everyone at work. That has facilitation in it. The podcast is a really interesting place because it teaches you how some of us, we've learned to just kind of keep quiet, and there's some different reasons, and she explores those, and it makes us think about when is it right to speak up and why haven't we, and how can we do that effectively. So those are some different resources. This goes off to a lot of different places, but in terms of ethical leadership, let's think about the future because it can be very, very remarkable. Thank you. Oh, the second thing I had to do correctly. Dziękuję.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And if you can stay for a stage for a few minutes to answer some of the questions. So probably you were so mesmerized during the talk you didn't have a chance to ask any questions online, so feel free to do them now. So I have the privilege to start with my own question, Patricia, while listening to your talk. So can you walk us through what would you say are the modern challenges of ethical leadership right now? What are the biggest challenges from your perspective?
I don't know if it's modern challenges. If we just start at the foundation, and this is why I think unlearning silence is important, is that sometimes we're afraid to, maybe it's Polish people aren't, but we're afraid to go against the crowd. And so we're afraid that if we speak up about something sometimes, that we won't be well liked, it's not the right thing, let's do it. this is how we're going to survive. Because there's other reasons why we are working in a professional environment, whether it's to excel, whether it's to make money or something like that. Now, when you talk about, we were talking about the internet and AI, we can just do a lot of things faster, and we don't know if it's right or wrong. So those are things to think about, and that's why it's really important that when we make decisions is to find the humanity in what we're doing again, because we have that opposite direction we can go into.
Mm-hmm. You also mentioned that it's getting difficult for people to discuss different opinions. How to deal with different understandings of respect, trust, and honesty?
Whether we have shared values. So I think that that's a really good discussion to have. So it's really easy, and this is why the facilitation is at play, is that it's really easy for me to think that it was unethical of my husband to send his wife, who can't swim, who gets motion sickness, and who goes across this Lombok Strait at the beginning. And for him to think, but no, I did it because the other option was even more dangerous, and we got there safely, and it was a great time. And so what that really means is, and you can learn about this in the negotiation, is how do you ask open-ended questions? How do you know what other people are thinking in terms of not just saying something like yes or no, but saying, what would make you feel safe? What makes you feel uncomfortable? And really having those different types of discussion, in my opinion.
Thank you very much for making that relation to your boat story as you went through it. I have another question. Looking at the people that we have right now in power, like Musk, Welsh, Jobs, Zuckerberg, and Trump, would you consider, from your perspective, not going into details into each of them, but is it possible to be both successful and ethical at the moment in the world that we are right now, with the challenges that we are being faced?
I think that depends on whose point of view, right? Because someone like Musk can think he is very successful, right? This is successful. I don't know how else people might deem success. He might think he's super ethical because he's making some cuts so that he can, bring us to Mars. So it's always that respect is saying, I see that person as a person and their worthiness and their what empathy we should have for them and their perception. And I think that helps us make different decisions. But I think they're just and so we just have to recognize that, don't we?
So it's not about the integrity and being ethical.
I mean, I think you could take any of those people and say they think they're being very authentic in what they think is right. And that's actually one of the things that we're finding more and more in the world or in the U.S. is that everybody has to be binary, yes or no, this extreme or this extreme. And what it should be, I was watching a speaker, is that we should all kind of see where are we in the middle, and we should be fighting this, these extreme thoughts of what's right and wrong, because it just does this, so we can't talk. And that's what we're seeing, at least in the United States. I'm not a political analyst. These thoughts are all my own. We can end the recording before this question.
All right. So let's change topic a little bit out of politics and ethical politics.
No, we can keep going. I don't mind.
Any more questions about the politics? All right. So another question from the audience. Is it still considered ethical when stakeholders challenge an idea with endless demands for proof and data instead of considering how to accomplish it?
Is it ethical for stakeholders to challenge you or basically tell you all their ideas? And then what was the second part?
Demands for proof and data instead of considering how to accomplish it.
Oh, I would say that's ethical. It's just annoying. So they are a stakeholder, and I think that's really about stakeholder collaboration, right? And that's really about saying, hey, you care about all these things. Here's where we're trying to go, stakeholder. How does your idea or opinion contribute to that? It's just framing that conversation differently, and that's very hard. I respect that. It's very hard when you're trying to do something and this person says do this and this person says do this. So it's really about having a conversation versus what's unethical or ethical, because they have something in their mind that they think is really important. That's about the ordering and prioritization in Scrum.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the audience? To go a little bit deeper. I think we're out of questions for now, Patricia, in terms of ethics, but Patricia will be available today until the end of the day to answer any more questions that you might have. I've just put you on the spot, but she's very happy to talk about pierogi and ethical approach to pierogis.
The 3 o'clock panel, yeah?
And the 3 o'clock panel as well. Pierogi panel this time?
Pierogi panel.
Professional Scrum
You should bring that
pierogi
next
panel.
year. Pierogi panel.
All right, thank you guys very much.
Thank you very much for your time.